A cruel act in the park, initially dismissed as a mean-spirited prank, inadvertently unveils a long-buried secret from the past. A man, a dog, and a story that transcends imagination. A tale where loyalty and a painful history intersect in the most unexpected way. This dog wasn't just a guide. It was a warrior that had once braved danger on the front lines. What could have caused the man to tremble and left the park in stunned silence for a brief, chilling moment? Follow this story to the very end to uncover a truly astonishing truth. If you enjoy meaningful tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel today. The story begins. Central Park had always been Emily Carter's sanctuary. She would often sit on the same old wooden bench beneath the shade of towering oaks, her face tilted toward the gentle breeze, listening to the symphony of chirping birds and the distant laughter of children. Her hand firmly held the leather leash of Bud, a loyal German shepherd and her trusted guide. Bud was more than just a companion. He was her eyes, her protector, and her lifeline after a car accident robbed her of her sight 5 years ago. Although the scenery around her was serene, Bud was restless. His ears twitched at every sound, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the park as if anticipating something. Across the park, Logan Myers leaned against his motorcycle, surrounded by a group of leather-clad friends. With his muscular frame, shaved head, and a tapestry of tattoos, Logan commanded attention wherever he went. His gaze lingered on Emily, sitting quietly with Bud's disciplined posture by her side. Something about her tranquility and the dog's poised demeanor unsettled him. Logan flicked his cigarette to the ground and smirked. "Look at that, a princess with her perfect little dog," he sneered, striding away from his bike. Laughter erupted from his friends behind him. Logan's heavy boots thudded against the pavement as he cut across the park, heading straight for Emily. Bud was the first to notice him. The dog's ears shot up, his body stiffened, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Emily felt it immediately. The tension coursed through the leash as Bud tilted his head toward the approaching footsteps. "Hello there," Logan jeered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your dog's pretty impressive. Huh? Does he do tricks? Maybe jump through a hoop or roll over for us?" Emily tightened her grip on the leash, her heart racing. Though she couldn't see the man in front of her, the malice in his tone was unmistakable. "Leave us alone," she said firmly, masking the fear rising within her. But Logan didn't back off. He clapped his hands loudly, deliberately trying to provoke Bud. The dog remained composed, his sharp eyes fixed on Logan, though his growl deepened, resonating like a distant storm. "Oh, stubborn, are we?" Logan scoffed, taking another step closer. The small crowd nearby began to take notice, but no one dared to intervene. Pushing things further, Logan lifted his leg, pretending as if he were about to kick Bud. The growl in the dog's chest grew into a menacing rumble, and Emily shouted, "Don't you dare!" What Logan didn't know was that Bud wasn't an ordinary dog. Before becoming Emily's guide, he had been a military canine, trained for high-risk missions and more than capable of taking down threats far greater than this man. As Logan's leg inched closer, years of combat instinct awakened within Bud. His muscles tensed, coiled like a spring, his gaze locked unwaveringly on the aggressor. The park fell silent. The air thickened with tension as everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Logan's laughter shattered the stillness. He raised his leg higher, relishing the moment and the fear he thought he was instilling. "Come on, dog. Show me what you've got," he taunted. Emily's fingers clenched the leash so tightly her knuckles turned white. She couldn't see what was unfolding, but the charged atmosphere told her everything. Bud remained frozen, his body taut as a wire, the growl now a deep and sharp warning, his final one. A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation in stunned silence. Some people raised their phones, recording the standoff, while others whispered nervously among themselves. "Someone should stop him," a woman whispered, but no one dared to step forward. Emily's voice broke through the tense air, trembling with urgency and emotion. "Leave us alone. He's not just a dog. He'll protect himself. Her warning only fueled Logan's smugness. Protect himself? He sneered, mimicking her. He's just a big pet. Watch this. He lunged forward, aiming a kick directly at Bud. The German Shepherd sprang into action, moving with lightning speed that left the onlookers stunned. Bud dodged the kick, his sharp bark slicing through the heavy silence like a thunderclap. In one fluid motion, he positioned himself squarely between Emily and Logan, his teeth bared, his piercing eyes locked onto the aggressor. This wasn't the reaction of an ordinary dog. It was the response of a professional protector, trained to confront and neutralize threats. Logan faltered, caught off guard by the intensity radiating from Bud. For a brief, frozen moment, time seemed to stop. Emily gripped the leash tightly, sensing every movement of her dog and the charged atmosphere enveloping them. "Bud," she whispered, her voice shaking. Bud didn't turn to acknowledge her. Every ounce of his focus remained on Logan, ready to react to any further aggression. The confidence that had painted Logan's face moments earlier began to dissolve, replaced by a flicker of unease. "What the hell's wrong with this dog?" he muttered, his tone stripped of mockery. The crowd murmured, their phones still capturing every second of the unfolding drama. At last, a uniformed park ranger pushed his way through the bystanders, his authoritative presence breaking through the tension. "What's going on here?" he demanded firmly. Logan froze, his swagger evaporating as he realized he had become the center of unwanted attention. Bud remained motionless, his stance an unmistakable warning. If Logan escalated further, the consequences would be out of his control. Emily exhaled shakily, her grip on the leash loosening just slightly, but she knew the danger hadn't entirely passed. Logan cautiously stepped back, raising his hands as if to defuse the situation. "Relax, I was just joking around." "This dog's overreacting," he muttered, though his voice now lacked conviction. The ranger stepped between Logan and Emily, his arms crossed and his gaze steely. "You call threatening a guide dog a joke? That's not just thoughtless. It's against the law." Emily clung tightly to Bud's leash, her body still trembling. Bud remained steadfast in front of her, his razor-sharp eyes locked on Logan. The tension hung thick in the air, and the murmurs of the crowd only deepened the unease. The ranger continued, his tone calm but resolute. "This dog is doing its job, protecting her. And judging by the situation, it's doing a better job than you are at being a decent human being." Logan's smirk vanished entirely as the ranger's words sank in. Meanwhile, Bud's growl remained low and steady. Emily's hand instinctively reached down, brushing over the top of Bud's head. "Good boy, Bud," she whispered, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. The crowd stayed silent, their eyes glued to the unfolding scene. Some continued recording on their phones, while others whispered quietly amongst themselves. Then, an elderly man stepped forward, his weathered face etched with years of life experience. The sunlight glinted off the military insignia on his cap as he spoke, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "This isn't an ordinary dog." The statement landed with weight, causing a ripple of reactions among the onlookers. Even Logan looked momentarily confused. Emily furrowed her brow, turning toward the old man, the uncertainty plain on her face. "What do you mean?" "He's my guide dog," she said softly, her grip tightening on Bud's leash, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped closer, nodding slowly. "He might be your guide dog now, but I'd bet my life that he served in the military before. That focus, that bark, those are instincts only a trained canine would have." His words hit Emily like a tidal wave. She sank to her knees beside Bud, her trembling hands running through his thick fur, as though seeing him for the first time in a new light. A veil had been lifted, revealing a truth about Bud she had never imagined. "Bud," she whispered again, her voice trembling with awe and disbelief. She had always known Bud was special, but the weight of his past now made her see him in an entirely new light. The old man continued, his voice steady but filled with reverence. "Dogs like him are heroes. They're trained to fight in war zones, to protect soldiers, to neutralize threats. If he reacted this way, it's because he sees that man as a genuine danger. His sharp gaze shifted to Logan, whose discomfort was now palpable. The bravado that had once surrounded him had completely dissolved. He took another cautious step back, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't know," he muttered, barely audible. The ranger stepped closer, his tone unyielding. "Not knowing doesn't excuse your actions. You should count yourself lucky this dog held back." Bud finally eased slightly, though his watchful eyes remained locked on Logan, ensuring he wouldn't try anything further. Emily exhaled shakily, her heart still pounding as she tried to process everything she had just learned. Around her, the murmurs of the crowd shifted from shock to admiration. To them, Bud was no longer just a guide dog. He was a warrior, a guardian, a hero in his own right. The ranger turned to Logan, his authoritative glare sharp with disdain. "You're done here." He pointed toward the edge of the park, signaling for Logan to leave. But Logan hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously between Bud and the old man who had just exposed the dog's incredible history. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and someone shouted, "Call the police!" Logan cursed under his breath. The tough guy persona he had worn like armor now shattered under the weight of judgmental stares and the silent, unrelenting presence of Bud. Though Bud's stance had relaxed slightly, his posture still radiated readiness, like a sentinel guarding his charge. Emily felt a swell of emotions she couldn't quite name: gratitude, amazement, and a profound respect for the dog who had been by her side through so much. She reached down, her fingers brushing against Bud's fur, and whispered, "You've been protecting me all along, haven't you?" Bud didn't move, but the steady warmth of his presence was answer enough. Logan finally turned, retreating under the watchful eyes of the ranger, the old man, and the crowd. The ranger waited until he was gone before addressing Emily, his tone softening. "You're in good hands, or pause, I should say. Whatever Bud's been through, he's here for you now. And clearly, he's not going to let anyone mess with you." The old man stepped closer, nodding in agreement. "He's a remarkable dog. You're lucky to have him, and he's lucky to have you." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She knelt beside Bud, wrapping her arms around him as the weight of everything washed over her. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything." The crowd began to disperse, their voices fading into the background, but the awe and respect for Bud lingered in the air. For Emily, the park no longer felt like just a quiet sanctuary. It was now a place where she had discovered something extraordinary, a connection to Bud that went deeper than she ever thought possible. Bud, a military dog? The words of the old man echoed in Emily's mind. War zones, soldiers in combat, threats. She crouched beside Bud, her trembling hands stroking his thick fur. "Bud," she whispered softly, as if trying to reach a part of him she had never known. Bud turned his head toward her, his eyes briefly filled with a gentle warmth before snapping back to focus on Logan. The unshakable loyalty in his gaze stirred a powerful emotion within her. This dog, her companion, her steadfast guide. Who was he? Really? The old man took another step forward, his expression both serious and kind. "Miss," he said, "you should know that dogs like him never forget their training. It's buried deep in their instincts, waiting for the moment they're needed. And today he decided you needed his protection." Emily swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. Memories surfaced. Times when Bud had been unusually alert, times when his bark had made her pause, and the countless moments when he had placed himself between her and potential harm like a shield. Until now, she had thought Bud was just a guide dog, but now she realized he was so much more. Meanwhile, Logan's discomfort had reached its peak. All right, he muttered, retreating step by step. "I didn't mean any harm." The ranger stood firm, his tone unwavering. "That's not for you to decide," he said sternly. "You've caused enough trouble." Logan turned, his shoulders slumping, and hurried toward the park exit. The ranger followed closely, ensuring he didn't return. The crowd began to disperse, though a few lingered, their eyes fixed on Emily and Bud. The old man remained as well, his gaze resting on Bud with quiet reverence. a wordless tribute to the remarkable dog. As the last murmurs of the onlookers faded into silence, Emily remained seated on the bench, her hand resting gently on Bud's back. "You've always been my protector," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I never knew just how much you'd sacrifice for me." Bud sat beside her, now calm, though his watchful eyes continued scanning the park, ensuring the danger had truly passed. For Emily, the park was no longer just a place of peace. It had become the setting where she uncovered an unexpected truth, one that would forever change how she saw Bud and even herself. That evening, Emily sat on the edge of her small sofa, her gaze fixed on Bud resting by her feet. The day's events replayed in her mind like a chaotic carousel. Logan's aggression, the ranger's intervention, and, most profoundly, Bud's extraordinary past. She reached for her laptop, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. She didn't know where to begin, but eventually, the phrase "history of K9 military dogs" formed in her mind. As she scrolled through article after article, she began to piece together Bud's story. These dogs weren't just trained. They were soldiers. They were taught to detect threats, protect their handlers, and remain calm under pressure. Every detail aligned with how Bud had acted that day. But it also sparked more questions. What had Bud experienced? Whom had he served with? And why had he ended up by her side? The thought of Bud risking his life in dangerous situations weighed heavily on her heart. Closing the laptop, Emily slid onto the floor beside Bud. Her fingers gently combed through his thick fur as she spoke softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I've always trusted you, Bud, but now I understand why. You're so much more than I ever knew. You've been through so much, haven't you?" Bud's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. He leaned slightly toward her, sensing the tenderness in her touch. For the first time, Emily felt a bond that went beyond mere dependence. It was a connection forged through Bud's quiet resilience and unwavering loyalty. The next day, Emily made a decision. She called the local veterans organization, explaining what had happened and asking if there was any way to learn more about Bud's past. The woman on the other end listened attentively and promised to look into it. "Many retired K9s are placed into new roles, such as guide dogs," she explained. "If Bud served in the military, there should be records." Hope flickered in Emily's chest. She thanked the woman and hung up, her heart racing with anticipation. She glanced down at Bud, who was sitting calmly by her side, his watchful eyes still scanning his surroundings, even in the safety of their home. "Maybe we'll finally get some answers, Bud," she murmured. Bud tilted his head slightly, his steady gaze meeting hers as though he understood. For the first time in years, Emily felt a shift within herself. Not just as someone being guided, but as a partner to the remarkable dog who had been silently guarding her through it all. "Or therapy," the woman explained. "It's a way for them to have a purpose after completing their service." The word purpose struck Emily deeply. Now, it carried a weight she had never fully understood before. Bud hadn't just been assigned to her to assist her. All along, he had been quietly saving her in ways she had never realized. When the call ended, Emily knelt beside Bud, a soft smile breaking through her swirling thoughts. "We'll figure this out together," she said. Bud's tail wagged gently, his calm demeanor radiating a quiet reassurance that eased her heart. A week had passed since the park incident, but questions about Bud's past continued to echo in Emily's mind. Every quiet moment seemed to replay the words of the old man that day. "This is a K9. He was trained for combat." Bud had always been extraordinary, but now Emily realized just how little she truly knew about him. Though she had relied on his guidance in countless ways, she felt an urgent need to uncover the life he had lived before they met. One afternoon, as she prepared to take Bud out for their usual walk, her phone buzzed on the table. The unfamiliar number on the screen made her pulse quicken. Emily answered quickly, her heart pounding. "Ms. Mitchell?" Calm voice asked. "This is Karen from the Veterans Organization. I found some information about your dog." Emily held her breath as Karen continued. "The military ID associated with your dog matches a retired K9 named Bravo. He served overseas alongside his handler, Sergeant Daniel Taylor. They completed multiple missions together before Bravo was retired. Hearing Bud referred to as Bravo sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Bravo, she repeated, the name almost foreign in her mouth. Karen went on. Sergeant Taylor retired a few years ago and is currently living in Montana. If you'd like, I can provide his contact information. He might be able to tell you more about what Bravo went through. Emily scribbled the details down, her hands trembling as she did. When the call ended, she glanced at Bud, who lay calmly at her feet, his steady presence both comforting and commanding. Bravo, she whispered again. The name felt heavy, laden with a history she couldn't yet comprehend. That evening, Emily sat on her sofa, staring at the phone in her hand. She had rehearsed what she would say to Sergeant Taylor countless times, but nerves kept her from pressing the call button. What if contacting him dredged up painful memories? What if he didn't want to talk about it? Emily looked down at Bud, her loyal companion who had protected her for years. She knew she owed it to him to uncover the past that had shaped him into the remarkable dog he was now. Taking a deep breath, she steadied her hand and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Hello? The sound sent a jolt through Emily's nerves, but she quickly gathered herself. Hello, is this Sergeant Daniel Taylor? My name is Emily Carter, and I believe my guide dog is Bravo, your former K9. A long silence followed. For a moment, Emily thought the call had dropped, but then Daniel's voice returned, filled with emotion. Bravo? Are you serious? I never thought I'd hear about him again. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she heard the depth of feeling in Daniel's words. He's been with me for a few years now, she said softly. I didn't know anything about his past. Until recently, he saved my life in ways I can't even begin to explain. Daniel drew a shaky breath. He saved my life too, more times than I can count. I need to see him. At that moment, Emily realized this was just the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for her, but for Bud and the man who had once been his closest comrade. The days following the call passed in an agonizingly slow wait. Daniel had promised to fly out as soon as possible to see Bravo. Emily tried to stick to her daily routines, but the anticipation of the reunion loomed large over everything. She couldn't stop wondering, how would Bud react? Would he remember Daniel? Would this meeting change the bond she shared with Bud? The unanswered questions spiraled in her mind as she prepared for the emotional day ahead. On the afternoon of Daniel's arrival, Emily stood outside her small apartment with Bud by her side. The leash in her hand trembled slightly as Bud shifted his weight, sensing her unease. It's going to be okay, Bud, she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. The faint sound of a car pulling up made her stiffen. Bud's ears perked up, his body tensing as he detected the approach. Emily tightened her grip on the leash, her heart pounding as the vehicle came to a stop. A man stepped out, his figure tall and broad, his movements deliberate. He paused, his gaze locking onto Bud, who was now standing completely still, his focus sharp and unwavering. Bravo, Daniel whispered, his voice breaking slightly. At the sound of his name, Bud's ears twitched, and then, as if pulled by an invisible force, he took a tentative step forward. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she released the leash, her hand falling to her side. Go on, Bud, she said softly. Bud hesitated for only a moment before moving toward Daniel, his tail wagging slowly, then faster as recognition seemed to flood over him. Bravo, Daniel repeated, dropping to his knees as the dog closed the distance between them. His arms wrapped around Bud, who nuzzled into him with an energy Emily had never seen before. A mix of joy, relief, and an unspoken understanding. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he held the dog who had once been his partner in life or death moments. Emily stood back, watching the reunion with a mixture of awe and gratitude. This wasn't just a meeting between man and dog. It was a reconnection of souls bound by loyalty, courage, and love. A car pulled up, the sound of the door slamming shut breaking the stillness. Moments later, a deep voice called out, Emily? His tone carried a blend of excitement and nervousness. Emily managed a shy smile. "Yes, I'm Emily. And this," she gestured toward Bud, her voice catching slightly, "is Bravo." At the mention of his old name, Bud's ears perked up. Daniel froze, his eyes locking onto the dog. Slowly, he knelt down, extending a hand toward him. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Do you remember me?" Bud remained still, his body stiff with uncertainty. Emily held her breath each second, stretching endlessly. Then Bud moved, stepping forward cautiously and sniffing Daniel's outstretched hand. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. First, a faint wag of his tail. Then, a quiet whine escaped him. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he gently stroked Bud's head. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered. Emily felt her own tears welling up, overwhelmed by the profound connection unfolding before her. She had always known Bud was special, but witnessing this reunion revealed a depth to him she hadn't fully understood before. Once inside the house, Daniel began sharing stories of his time in the military with Bravo. "Bravo was my partner on every mission," he said, his gaze distant with memory. "He saved my life more times than I can count. Fearless doesn't even begin to describe him, but I never thought I'd see him again." Emily listened intently, her fingers absent-mindedly stroking Bud's fur as Daniel spoke. The stories were harrowing, filled with danger and sacrifice. Yet every word carried Daniel's deep respect and love for the dog who had been his lifeline. That evening, as Daniel prepared to leave, he knelt beside Bud one last time. "You've got a good life now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't ask for anyone better to take care of you." Emily felt her chest tighten at his words. "Thank you for trusting me with him," she said softly. Daniel stood, offering her a small, bittersweet smile. "He's exactly where he belongs." As Daniel walked away, Emily looked down at Bud. "You've been through so much," she murmured. "But no matter what, this is your home now." After Daniel's visit, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what she had learned about Bud, or Bravo, as Daniel had called him. She would often replay the stories in her mind, trying to piece together the life he had lived before he became her guide dog. The bravery, the loyalty, and the bond he had shared with Daniel. It all added a new layer to her understanding of the dog who had quietly protected her for so long. Even though she knew Bud's journey had been long and difficult, she also knew one thing for certain. He had found his place, and she would make sure he never had to face the struggles of his past again. The stories of courage, sharp instincts in dangerous situations, and unwavering loyalty painted a picture of a dog who had endured more than most humans could imagine. That thought filled Emily with both admiration and heartache. Every time she ran her fingers through Bud's soft fur or felt his steady presence guiding her across the street, she wondered how much of his loyalty was rooted in the scars of his past. One afternoon, Emily decided to take Bud to a quieter part of the park, a place she had avoided since the incident with Logan. While the memory of that day still lingered, this time felt different. She no longer saw Bud solely as a guide dog but as a protector, a warrior who had chosen to place his trust in her. As they walked along the narrow path, she spoke softly. "I hope you know how much you mean to me, Bud. You've done so much for so many people, and yet, every day you choose to stay by my side." Bud gently nudged her leg, as if to say he understood. Emily smiled, sitting down on a bench to let Bud rest at her feet. The park was peaceful, filled only with the sound of rustling leaves carried by a gentle breeze. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of calm. But her thoughts returned to something Daniel had said during his visit. "He never forgets the training. It's always there, waiting." She wondered if Bud ever thought about his old life. The rush of adrenaline, the dangers, and the constant sense of purpose that must have driven him every day. That evening, Emily decided to call Daniel again. "Daniel," she began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. Do you think Bud, or Bravo, ever remembers his old life?" There was a brief pause before Daniel replied. "Maybe in his own way. But dogs like him, they don't live in the past. They live for their person. And right now, Emily, you are his mission. Those words echoed in her mind long after the call ended. You are his mission. For years, Emily had always seen Bud as her guide. But now, she realized, Bud wasn't just the eyes that helped her navigate a world she couldn't see. He was her lifeline. Yet, their relationship went beyond mere dependency. It was one of mutual connection. She had given Bud a purpose, just as he had restored her confidence to truly live again. Theirs was a partnership in every sense of the word. That night, as she sat next to Bud, she whispered softly, I'll make sure you know you're loved, Bud, every single day. Bud leaned into her, his warm presence bringing her a sense of peace. In that moment, Emily felt comforted by the thought that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In the weeks that followed, Emily grew more attuned to her bond with Bud. His past didn't diminish their relationship. Instead, it deepened its significance. Every time he guided her across a street or nudged her away from danger, she thought of the battles he had endured, both on the battlefield and in adapting to this new life. Still, one thought haunted her late at night. Was she giving Bud the life he deserved? One morning, while sipping her coffee, Emily came across an article about retired military dogs. The piece detailed the challenges many K9s faced after leaving the structured environment of their training. Some struggled with restlessness or depression, yearning for a sense of purpose. She glanced down at Bud, lying peacefully at her feet. He didn't appear uneasy, but what if she was missing the signs? The idea that Bud might quietly long for something more gnawed at her. Determined to ensure his happiness, she began researching programs for retired service dogs. She discovered an organization that provided activities to help dogs like Bud regain a sense of fulfillment. That afternoon, she called the organization and shared Bud's story. The woman on the other end of the line responded warmly, We'd love to evaluate Bud. These sessions aren't just activities. They're designed to give dogs a renewed sense of purpose. I think he'd thrive here. The following week, Emily and Bud arrived at the organization's facility. It was an expansive property, featuring open fields, obstacle course training setups, and small groups of retired K9s working with their handlers. The moment they stepped through the gates, Bud perked up. His ears stood tall, and his tail wagged faintly. Emily could feel the excitement radiating through his every movement. For the first time, she wondered if this was what he'd been missing. A trainer approached them, her smile warm and welcoming. This must be Bravo, she said, kneeling down to greet Bud. Let's see what he remembers. Bud was guided through a series of exercises. Tracking scents, navigating obstacles, and identifying specific odors. Sitting on a nearby bench, Emily watched every moment intently. Her heart tightened as she saw Bud come alive. He moved with a precision and confidence she had never witnessed before. It was as though a dormant part of him, something buried deep, had suddenly awakened. The trainer returned, her expression glowing with admiration. He's extraordinary, she said, her eyes sparkling. It's like he never left the field. Emily nodded, her emotions caught between pride and a bittersweet ache. That evening, back at home, she knelt beside Bud, her fingers gently stroking his soft fur. That evening, back at home, she knelt beside Bud, her fingers gently stroking his soft fur. You're amazing, she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. I never want you to lose that special part of yourself. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out together. Bud leaned into her, his steady presence filling her with strength. For Emily, that day had been a revelation. Bud wasn't just her guide. He was still Bravo, and his story was far from over. In the weeks following the evaluation, Emily's life found a new rhythm. Every Saturday, she and Bud returned to the training center, where he participated in exercises designed for retired K9s. It was clear that Bud found joy there, tracking scents, mastering obstacles, and responding to commands with the precision of a dog still at the peak of his abilities. Watching him work with such purpose, Emily was filled with pride. Yet, she also came to a deeper understanding of who Bud truly was. One afternoon, after another successful training session, the trainer pulled Emily aside. Bud is exceptional, she said, her eyes gleaming with admiration. "He's not just a retired K9. He's one of the best I've ever seen. It's rare to see this level of focus and discipline, especially after being out of active duty for so long." Emily smiled, but her heart grew heavy. She knew these sessions brought Bud joy, but she also worried about balancing his needs with her own. "Do you think he's happy?" she asked hesitantly. The trainer's smile softened as she met Emily's gaze. "Happiness for dogs like him comes from having a purpose. And Emily, you are part of that purpose." That evening, sitting in her small living room, Emily glanced down at Bud, who lay at her feet, his breathing steady and calm. His presence had always been a source of comfort. She thought about everything Bud had given her over the years: guidance, protection, and unwavering loyalty. She'd once believed she depended solely on him, but now she understood their bond was mutual. "You've never stopped being a hero, have you?" she murmured, her hand gently stroking his soft fur. "Even now, you're always watching over me." Not long after, Emily received a call from Daniel Taylor. His voice was warm over the phone, and their conversation lasted nearly an hour as they discussed Bud's progress. When Emily shared details about the training sessions, Daniel chuckled. "That's the Bravo I remember," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "But don't forget, his greatest mission now is you. You're his family." Those words echoed in Emily's mind long after the call ended. Bud's life may have changed, but his purpose had not: protecting the ones he loved. One evening, during a walk, Emily and Bud stopped at a familiar bench in the park. It was the very spot where their lives had taken a dramatic turn just weeks ago when Bud's past had come to light. Sitting on the bench, Emily let the cool evening breeze brush against her face, carrying with it a quiet sense of peace. "You've been through so much," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "But no matter where you've been or what you've done, you chose to stay by my side. And I'll never take that for granted." As if understanding her words, Bud leaned against her leg, his quiet, steadfast presence offering a profound sense of peace. Emily silently vowed to herself that she would continue to honor Bud's past while building a future where he felt fulfilled and loved. For Emily, there was no greater privilege than walking through life with such an extraordinary companion as Bud. A dog who had been a warrior, a guide, and, above all, a loyal friend who never left her side. This story serves as a powerful reminder of loyalty, protection, and how the past can shape the present. If you were in Emily's position, what would you do to protect your companion? Have you ever experienced the strength of an unshakable friendship or loyalty? Share your thoughts or stories in the comments. Your voice could inspire others and help spread the message of love and appreciation. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with friends and family so we can all celebrate the value of connection and sacrifice together. Thank you for taking the time to read. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future heartfelt and meaningful stories. Together, we can make the world a better place, one small but impactful action at a time. Wishing you peace and happiness always. Thank you for supporting the channel. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. The stories shared here are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared to promote the universal values of humanity and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any errors, we kindly ask for your understanding and forgiveness. Wishing you all the best in life.